welcome to this week's edition of the Universal Church of Truth. I am one half of your host, Hunter, and this is...
Mary. Yeah, I'm Mary.
Today we are talking about Moon Knight Episode 2. I have once again done my best to wear all white for Moon Knight. I got the Inside Out t-shirt. I've got the white hat. It's great. We're thematic here at Murphy's Multiverse. Mary, what did you think of Moon Knight Episode 2, Summon the Suit?
When I rewatched it this morning, I still think I liked it better. I think it's all of it grows on me. I mean, I already like it, so it's not like crazy. But I assumed people would be very opinionated on Mr. Knight and his reveal, and I guess that was probably one of the biggest things to come out of this episode, which is also weird because we kind of got the like lowdown on like Khonshu and like Moon Knight, but it's just like aside, like it was kind of very brief. So I liked it. I think Mr. Knight, I really like Mr. Knight as they did, but I know that is a hot topic. What about you?
Yeah, so I agree with you. I think that so far what I'm finding with this show in general is on the days that they're coming out and I'm rewatching the episodes I've already seen. I think especially watching them with my roommate who, for like NDA purposes, I couldn't watch with the first time. Seeing his reaction as someone who like has no idea who Moon Knight is, only kind of watches Marvel stuff sometimes, just like whatever happens to pique his interest, and seeing him get really into it and like it, I feel like it's making me appreciate it from like a whole different perspective, which has been really fun. But yeah, I've been enjoying it a lot more on my second watch. I agree with you. I think the big thing from this episode, well, there's really two big things from this episode. One being the introduction of Mr. Knight, as you brought up. Really cool design. I mean, they nailed the costume, but, this is a wholly original take on the Mr. Knight persona, at least so far. And, speaking of other wholly original things, this episode also introduces Layla. Who we had a little vocal cameo from in the last episode, and she makes her full appearance here, and we kind of get to meet her, and through her we learn a little bit more about Mark Spector's life. I honestly have been dying to hear your thoughts on Layla as a character and where you think she might be going and that sort of thing. So please fire away with that.
I really like her, and like you said, we've seen some more of these, so like I really like her development too. Nothing like spoilers, but like she's just a great character. Like they basically like updated the classic comics romantic interest Marlene, who sucked. I hate Marlene. I really do. But like Layla is like smart and she's good at things and she like is useful and she's also like has a personality other than like the damsel in distress. So like all of that's just a solid, easy update. But I really like how they're, I think, gonna tie it in. This whole Khonshu wants her as his next avatar. I think the fact that she's such a strong character is gonna make that much more interesting to pursue versus if it's just kind of like a one-off, not a one-off, but like an empty sort of romantic interest that's just there for easy plot stuff. I think she's actually like a real character.
Right.
And I like that the actress is actually Egyptian. There's actually someone Egyptian on screen, at least in the show, probably because they're doing a lot of the Egyptian mythology, imagery. They're going to Egypt, as we saw at the end of this episode. So, and I know behind the camera they had plenty of that too, but it's also nice that someone on screen's a bit more. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember reading somewhere that the character wasn't essentially written as Egyptian, but when they ended up casting an Egyptian actress, they kind of rewrote some things to make it fit her a little bit better, which is pretty cool to see. Yeah, I mean, while we're on the topic, we might as well get into it. There's still a lot we haven't seen from Layla. I mean, we've only just met her. But you mentioned Moon Knight having... Well, yeah, let's talk about two things that you're going to be a little bit more of an expert on than me. One, Moon Knight having love interest in the comics named Marlene, who is obviously not present in this show. Maybe potentially replaced by Layla. Maybe she's a whole new character. I guess we'll find out more as we watch. And two, the idea of Khonshu jumping. I think this show, something that I don't remember hearing a lot about in the comics, is this concept of like Khonshu just jumping from avatar to avatar, kind of like when it suits him, or making deals with people. Where I feel like in the comics it was more so like, all right, you are Moon Knight now, like you are my avatar, and that's final. And then they don't really like. I don't know. Does that come up again? Is the concept of him jumping from people first into person like a thing in the comics?
Not really that I've ever seen. There's always been a back and forth of Mark embracing Khonshu more, and then he'll end like half of his runs just end with him saying, "No, I don't care about you," and like breaking his statue and like not talking to him for a while. But like in those times, Khonshu doesn't go anywhere else. It doesn't seem like he has that choice in the comics. I assume he would have,
Right.
And I think it's like mentioned, but I can't think of it actually happening.
Right.
Yeah, so that is also, and Ethan Hawke's Arthur Harrow, he mentions that Cain was a gift from Amit to Amit's first avatar. So that's introducing avatars of other Egyptian gods, and that really is not very common in Moon Knight comics.
Right.
Like, should have been like kind of normal, but that'll be interesting too because normally you don't see a lot of that.
Is that something that they really explain in the comics? The idea that Khonshu, for whatever reason, is able to have like an avatar on Earth, but there aren't other Egyptian avatars, or they just kind of like brush by that and don't really bring it up?
I haven't really seen it brought up, and I obviously haven't read every single issue that's ever existed, but I have read a lot. No, not really. I always assumed that there maybe were, and they just didn't bring them up in the comics, or because they just didn't care, maybe. And I think there's stuff to do with like which gods just are like have more power in their other
Right.
realm that they're in at any given time. I'm not extremely well versed in that. It's not something that's like common or like often seen in the comics now.
Right. Cool. Well, yeah, let's talk about this Marlene person really quick. So in the comics, Mark Spector has a love interest and it's established love interest again. I feel like with him being a somewhat obscure character, it's not an established love interest in the same way that like Peter Parker has Gwen Stacy and Mary Jane or whatever. But yeah, so Marlene is his person of interest in the comic books. What is Marlene's whole deal?
Well, yes. I mean, she's there in like virtually all of his comics too. Like there's not even
Mhm.
like I'm sure there's some exceptions, but
Was
like when
she?
Casey dies, for example, and Spider-Man, like that doesn't happen. Marlene's just there, and half the time they are like not getting along. They were never married that I know. They do have a kid more recently,
Oh,
um, but yeah, that's an interesting one. But she was the daughter of an archaeologist in actually I don't think it was even Egypt, it was the Sudan. But they were doing there's a dig site, and then um, Mark's classic antagonist Bushman. They were doing mercenary stuff. This is doing mercenary stuff, and essentially it all went wrong, and Bushman killed
as
Marlene's
it
dad.
does.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then I think Mark got upset at that point and kind of like saves Marlene but gets shot, and that's when he dies in front of the statue, and she's there. So
Right.
that's kind of where their relationship starts, and she's just there for much of it, often as the "I'm mad that you're going out doing weird things" kind of person. Sometimes they're fine, but she doesn't bring a whole lot to the table in the comic.
Yeah, a bit stereotypical maybe, or just like two-dimensional character of just I'm here to be not crazy and point out that you are crazy, and that's like the whole purpose. Great. Yeah, so I mean, we've known Layla for about one episode, and she already seems a lot more interesting than that. I mean, the Scarab, which is a really interesting concept they brought up, that little compass trying to point them towards Amit's tomb. She mentions having been searching for that with Mark, and she knows what it is, and she seems to be very intelligent. She seems to be very capable. Yeah, and I'm with you. I mean, again, I didn't know much about Moon Knight, and Layla is, for all intents and purposes, like an original character. And when that happens, it can always go either way. It can either be an original character that just doesn't mesh, or they can take off and end up I mean, you look at like Harley Quinn being the prime example of that. But yeah, I think she has a lot of potential. I'm really excited for people to see some of the stuff that she does and gets into in like the episodes that haven't come out yet. But yeah, so she's really cool. And speaking of Amit, um, we learn a lot more about Ethan Hawke's Arthur Harrow in this episode. We talked earlier about jumping from Avatar to Avatar with Khonshu, and here we find out that Arthur Harrow is the previous Moon Knight. I guess he's the previous. He doesn't specify that he actually ran around in the armor and did Moon Knight stuff, but he does kind of hint that he was like the fist of Khonshu. So that's a really interesting concept. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's interesting because it's the same of just switching avatars. I don't know the mechanics of it, because I guess if Khonshu just wanted to do it and he could, he would have picked Layla already or whatever. But it does make me wonder how that relationship ended. Does that mean, was it like a Arthur Harrow's decision and that was final? So if Mark decided to walk away, that would do it? I don't know. That's my best guess at this point. But obviously they did not part ways feeling good about each other. So, which is interesting because it does really go both ways. Obviously, Arthur Harrow thinks Khonshu's a liar. He calls him a liar bunch. And he thinks his way of doing justice is not the right way. Obviously, that's part of his plot with Emmett. But Khonshu also really seems to hate him. And it could be petty, just because, he could be like mad he left. But
yeah,
I am curious what I bet there's some, maybe not flashback, but I bet I would want something later. I haven't seen it, to go into them more, because that.
Well, it's interesting because. Yeah, it's interesting because in this episode this episode does a lot for backstory in little bits, because this show, I mean, I feel like it almost is sort of an origin story without being one, in the sense that like it picks up after he's become Moon Knight and we're not meeting him pre-Moon Knight, and then we see how all of it happens, but we are like getting his origin and all of these characters' origins in like little bits through like one line of dialogue here and then like another line of dialogue here. And they're talking about, Khonshu talks with Mark about having made a deal, and Mark mentions, like, oh, I made a deal with him, and if you like, you're not really part of that deal, Steven, and if you get Layla involved, like things are getting messy. Like, I just want to get this deal over with it and leave. And that seems to hint, to me at least, that Khonshu, when he made that deal with Mark, that might be binding. Like, he can't leave Mark's body until the deal is complete or Mark breaks the deal, is my guess. And I'm wondering if there was some sort of similar situation with Arthur Harrow. Like, they had some sort of deal in place and it got broken, and that's why they're so salty.
Well, it's interesting because he does mention, Arthur Harrow does say he's always going to tell you there's one last thing.
Yeah.
So because it was interesting you said that, I thought, oh wait, what if they made a deal and they completed it, and that was the end of Avatar, Egyptian godship. But it almost doesn't sound like that was the case either. If he's
like it was not a mutual parting of ways. It was definitely more of this guy kept telling me there was one more thing left in the deal, and then eventually I got real sick of that, so I just like broke the deal and dipped, and Khonshu's probably real upset about it. So that's probably more in line with it. I mean, speaking of Arthur Harrow, this episode also does a lot more with talking about what his goals are. Really, I mean, he brought it up in the last episode, but we actually see the little community he's built in this episode, and we see the members of his cult and their personalities and what they're thinking. And he does, in a weird way, I feel like Arthur Harrow in this is a lot of the things that Marvel was promising Ultron would be, like way back in 2014. Before this is, I'm coming up with this on the spot. I didn't even prep this, but like I remember prior to Age of Ultron coming out, the cast and He Who Shall Not Be Named and the people who like were working on the movie, they were all saying like Ultron is such a good villain because he speaks in poetry, and some of the stuff he says like borders on kind of making sense, and it like makes you uncomfortable because ethically it's wrong, and they went all this stuff, and then that movie did get into that a little bit, but it wasn't maybe as deep as advertised, or didn't feel as deep as advertised walking out of the theater. But here I'm watching, and I wholly disagree with Arthur Harrow's whole thing, because obviously it's very bad. But the way he speaks about it and like the passion he speaks about it, I mean, it's Ethan Hawke, so fantastic performance. But like hearing his goals and the idea of I like Khonshu's wrong because he killed people after they did bad, and at that point it's too late. Like they already did the bad, so we should be killing them ahead of time. Like, yeah, obviously on paper that sounds terrible, but just like I can see in Ethan Hawke's performance how he is like convincing people to join this cult, and like the performance on Ethan Hawke's part is just incredible. Like, and especially this time around, I think it hit me even harder. Like, wow, he is like selling it right now. Like he's really going all in. But yeah, I thought that was really cool, and them like learning different languages and knowing each other's names and yada 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 yada. But yeah, I think this episode went a long way with solidifying Arthur Harrow as like a genuinely really interesting Marvel villain, MCU villain as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
And now he's with Amit, and now he is just killing people before they do wrong.
Even with Amit, I just thought of it right now because he's not her avatar.
Right, he's not. He has that staff.
Say where he got it, and they're trying to find her tomb because she's been asleep, and so it's not like he's been talking to her at all. So I wonder if maybe that's not even something that's meant to make you think about it. Like it's probably nothing, but it could be interesting if they ever do meet and she's like, no, not a fan.
That's a really good point. I actually didn't think about that at all. In my head, I was thinking like if he ever does like somehow successfully get to Amit, I'm like, oh boy, that's gonna be scary because now you're gonna have like one Egyptian avatar versus another Egyptian avatar, and that's like the third act. But what if he gets there and he's like, yeah, I've been killing people for you, and Amit's like, why were you doing that? That's crazy. That would be a very interesting twist. I would like to see how that plays out. But yeah, I mean, let's actually talk about Mr. Knight. I feel like we touched on it a little bit and then moved on. In the comics, and correct me if I'm wrong, but Mr. Knight is sort of like how we mentioned last week, how Moon Knight is like sometimes a personality of like his own separate personality. Mr. Knight is sort of like that. You can maybe touch a little bit deeper on how he is in comparison to Moon Knight. And in the show, as anyone who's watching this and has watched the episode knows, Mr. Knight is less of his own thing and more of just like Steven's Moon Knight skin, like how he projects the armor of Khonshu on himself is like this dapper British man with a mask, and he gets a pretty cool introduction. So yeah, talk about Mr. Knight in the comics compared to the show, and you said you loved what the show did, so please tell me why.
I think that might be. I think people who are really into the comics, Mr. Knight, are the ones who are not happy about it. Which I kind of get. I mean, I get it if you want it to be accurate. Anyway, but so in the comics, he is often viewed as one of the other personalities of the same person. Sometimes, like with Moon Knight, it's a bit more ambiguous if it is just one of them wearing a suit, but still in like the Jake or the Stephen or the Mark persona. Mr. Knight, people call him Mark constantly. Like he goes to therapy in the current run, like a lot. And for him as Mark, like, and he doesn't really fight it much. But more or less, yeah, he's generally looked at as a different personality. Obviously, I've never been the biggest fan of him. I like the way he looks. He looks super cool. It's just different.
It's a great design. It's a great design. Absolutely. Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with him. I just never fully understood why he was around. And I think, from what I can tell, they wanted the character to be in superhero mode kind of at all times, but more casual than like a full cape. Like it really did seem just like a costume difference. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people would argue, but he's a more casual Moon Knight. Like he will talk to the police or people. I think he's currently a priest, like in the very current run, like of the Church of Khonshu, but yet he doesn't want to talk to Khonshu. It's very odd.
So he's like, so just to clarify, Mr. Knight in the comics is essentially like he is still Moon Knight, like a sort of like a Moon Knight personality. He's just like Moon Knight who has like will talk to people instead of just punch them in the face. Like he's like casual, chill. So he's sociable Moon Knight.
Yeah, that's a good way to. Yeah,
Okay.
that's a good way to do it. Yeah, pretty much. But because of that, he is usually, not always. There's some funny panels of him like sleeping in a sarcophagus, and his like iPhone alarm goes off, and he like really struggles to get out of it to turn off. So there are like some funny ones too. But generally, he is more serious. He's not what we just saw with Stephen Grant in the episode, which, as you mentioned, was really just Stephen's attempt to summon a suit, and he's thought of a suit. And I think that's very clever. I think that's really funny. And I do think because I, within the show, really enjoy the Mark Steven dynamic so much, and I'm personally not like screaming for like way more Moon Knight, which I get it's Moon Knight, but I kind of like how they're doing that. I think it was risky, and obviously not everyone's happy with it, but I think it could pay off a lot down the line because that's just adding to it, that character dynamic with it. And I think it helps, honestly, sell Mr. Knight, because otherwise it's like, okay, so it's this guy in a weird outfit but different. Like I think
right.
people aren't as into it. It's not like a really obvious difference to anybody's outfit.
The more you explain it, the more it feels like they kind of did. I can feel people watching this video and like getting upset, which is funny to me. Again, like I just don't know that much about the character, this specific character in the comic, but it feels like they kind of, in a way, roundabout way, did Mr. Knight the way he is in the comic. It's just like a streamlined thing, because that's what we've seen so far. The thing Steven has over Mark is that Steven is a lot more like communicative. Like he worked from like when we saw him introduced in the last episode, just like talking to like the little kid in the museum, and like the way he can talk to other people. Like he's a lot more sociable than Mark, who's more of like the silent killer type.
Yeah.
And again, we also mentioned in last week's recap that part of the reason most likely they're not doing like Jake Lockley or making Moon Knight like his own separate personality or yada 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 is because they're already introducing so many concepts in this show that, cutting back on how many personalities there are at any given moment allows them to develop the personalities that do exist a little bit better. But the result of that seems to be Mr. Knight being he is a separate Moon Knight personality from the other Moon Knight that we see with like the hood and the mummy wrappings and logo on the chest and yada yada yada. But he is literally a more sociable Moon Knight. Like Steven's approach to being Moon Knight is going to be talk first, fight second, whereas Mark is fight first, talk second. So by making Mr. Knight just like the Steven Moon Knight skin, it feels like you are kind of accomplishing both goals without it being like too much at once. But I feel like where people get upset is that Mr. Knight in the comics, with his splash pages, and I have read at least one comic where he goes in and like clears a warehouse or, like a gang of guys by himself and does so very like violently well, like quipping and, being kind of fun. People, my guess is the upset feelings come from that seemingly being gone, is that you take Mr. Knight and you're still accomplishing the same goal, but you're making him goofier. And there's that like soft spot that people have with the MCU making things goofier, which I can totally see in some instances, but I do think works here. But yeah, I guess I can see how people would be upset, but at the end of the day, watching the episode, I was like, no, this is kind of fun. I really like this. And also, like, if we should have learned anything about the MCU at this point, it's that characters and concepts aren't always introduced as comic accurate per se, but that doesn't mean they won't get there eventually. I mean, we saw Mr. Knight for like 3 seconds in this, and Steven is still getting the hang of it, but who's to say that, 2 or 3 more project appearances down the line, Steven at that point is probably going to be pretty used to being Moon Knight and might be like, yeah, well, this is my Moon Knight skin, and like, this is life now. So let me just be like the talk first Moon Knight, and we get more comic accurate situations. I mean, there's still so much we don't know, but the way they introduce him is really cool. Where he's like saying suit, 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 and then he just he does the superhero landing, and then yeah,
it's like a pole first, so but then he does land. I did like
yeah.
that. That was something I remembered. But yeah, I mean, I actually just genuinely like it. Like, and you make great points. Like that does. I didn't think about it that way, but kind of they are accomplishing that same goal that maybe the comics were, just a little bit different kind of filter on it, at least for now. But I think that is fair. And I think a lot of people are upset that this show isn't just like super dark and just super violent, very serious. And it's like, I'm not sure anybody would really enjoy it if it was. I'm sure some would, obviously, but I don't fully get the criticism, I guess, on that front, because it's like, to me, like Stephen Grant and his quippiness and his lightness to balance out all this like weird and very serious stuff that's going on around him. Like the plot is odd, even by MCU standards, because you got Egyptian gods and whatnot, but it's certainly not like light. Like, there's demons coming out of the ground from a cane and people trying to kill everyone on Earth before they do something bad. And what is that, half people? It's like Thanos. But so I honestly think that that's like probably the best, like kind of sort of creative tweak that they did for the show that's not in the comics, is make Stephen Grant the way he is. I was really skeptical about it. But yeah.
Yeah. So when he becomes Mark Spector Moon Knight, when he's done doing like the quick Mr. Knight bit and he goes full action hero mode again, I guess where I'm going with this, just to like skip past the intro to it, is it does feel like, and you said earlier that you're actually okay with this. It feels like they're using Moon Knight as like the like one scene per episode. Like he gets a few really cool splash page shots, and then they go right back to Mark and Steven. Like if this episode proves anything to me, it's that Mark and Steven are very much the focus of the show, and Moon Knight himself comes second after the two of them. Why I like, again, you said earlier that you are okay with that. I'm personally okay with that too, just because I feel like as cool as Moon Knight is, this show is so much more interesting to me when it's focusing on the DID and the, opening up these characters' backstories and yada yada yada. I mean, the episode ends with Mark now in control of the body, which I think will be interesting, potentially impacting the next episode, where we've spent 2 episodes with Steven like mainly in control, and now at the end Mark is like, nope, you gave me the body, I'm keeping the body, you have fun in the mirrors. And which, by the way, I noticed like the slight hypocrisy in Steven of being like, well, this is terrible, like you can't keep me in here, like what's going on, give me my body back. And Mark's like, no. I'm like, Steven, that's what you have been doing to Mark this whole time, is keeping him locked away in this terrible little like no man's land. But yeah, and episode ends with them being back in Egypt, and just the way the scene is shot, it sort of implies that Mark has like a history in Egypt, which I mean, I'm sure he does. He is the avatar of an Egyptian god. He's also like on the floor drinking liquor, I think it looks like, and yeah, just like these little teases about their personal lives, I find that so much more interesting than any of the. I mean, the Moon Knight stuff is really really cool in the doses that it happens, but this really is like a character first show, for sure.
Yeah, and I think, and obviously the series is not done, but I do think that Steven and Mark will be like, everyone's going to look back and that's what they're going to think of at the show. I'm sure more Moon Knight and Mr. Knight will come towards the end. That just tends to be how things work. But I mean, I'm on the same boat of thinking that their kind of psychological story is much more interesting than putting on a cape and fighting people. And I mean, you want both. It's not that I dislike Moon Knight by any means, but it's just, I think in a limited series, first intro, and there's a guy who has multiple personalities and is an after, like, I like that they're actually getting into it. I think that's, yeah. And well, I do. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, well, like, and that's the hook for this show. In the same way, like, you know, we knew that WandaVision was gonna end with some sort of big, like, CG heavy witch fight of some kind or something. Like, we knew that's what was coming because at the end of the day, it is a Marvel show, and like, feelings on that aside, but when you look back at WandaVision, what you remember that show as is the first half of that season where they're experimenting and doing cool things, and the hook is that it's a sitcom. And I think that no matter how Moon Knight ends, even if it does end in some like really big CGI slugfest that you and I get on here and say we don't like, I think that when we look back at the show, what's going to really stick with us, like you said, are these early episodes of Steven and Mark. Like, Steven and Mark are it. This is how they're selling the show, and they're doing it really well. Yeah, please continue what you were gonna say.
I don't remember. I think at one point I was gonna say, I mean, the plot they've laid out so far is not appropriate, but for like Moon Knight to just be walking around everywhere fighting people, like it's slower, it's more grounded, but it is very much there's a cult leader slowly planning to do stuff. It's like. And he hasn't done anything. So if Moon Knight went in and took him out, he'd kind of be, proving Arthur Harris' point. So I think they've set it up to the point where it doesn't feel out of place, that you don't see as much Moon Knight. I understand wanting that, but I think the story they have is very well balanced in that way so far. And I was going to say, I thought of it, was Steven being obviously very upset that he was the mirror guy, for lack of a better term. I mean, he truly thinks that this is his body, even after meeting Mark, knowing that Mark has been doing shit for years. He saw his passport, and I saw somewhere on Twitter the passport showed 2018, and it like proved that he didn't get like blipped because he's been doing stuff. But that's kind of fun. But anyway, Mark's been living in the storage unit, but Steven's still so convinced that that's him. Like, and it brings so many questions that I'm really interested in.
Right.
I don't know the answers to it. Like, why is Steven just now seemingly doing stuff? Why does he not know about Mark if Mark knows about him? Like, what? There's something that happened, I feel like, that made Steven really either, I don't know, I guess he could have forgotten Mark for some reason, but come into control or kind of primary control of the body kind of out of nowhere, and then
and to be fair, like, we don't even know how long, like you said, we don't know how long Steven has existed, but even we don't even know if he has technically really been the one like in primary control, because the show does a really good job of like not telling us things. And I'm so glad you brought this up, because this was exactly the next thing I really wanted to talk about was, like, Steven is so convinced that this is his body. Mark is the alter. Mark developed or popped up at some point in his life and is screwing up his life, yada, yada, yada. And the show itself does a really good job of really not making it clear who is right. I mean, I do think that Mark Spector is probably the original body, but, for the casual viewer or for someone who really wants to deep dive into it, like, you totally can, and you can come up with an answer for either way and have it be somewhat justified at this point in the show. And, like, there's the line where he mentions that it's his mom's flat, and Layla's like, oh, you're talking to her again? And that throws some confusion in there, because it's like, okay, so if Steven is the one talking to his mom, then that would mean he's the original one, because it's his mom and she would know. And then, okay, well, if Mark wasn't talking to his mom, that maybe that was the excuse of like getting around it and not just saying, oh, I have DID and she doesn't know this personality or whatever. But, I've seen other people point out that like some of like the postcards that Steven has gotten from his mom, or like he doesn't seem to be, there's no proof that she's on the other end of his phone calls. Like he could just be leaving messages for her. And some of the postcards in his apartment that are supposedly from his mom are the same ones that are in the museum. So it's totally possible that when Mark had control of the body, he was, sending those postcards to Steven to convince him that he had a relationship with his mom.
Which is so like, why would he, like, there's so
many why would you do that?
Doing that, that's so interesting, but it's like, why? Like he clearly has some sort of,
it's almost like
love for Steven if he's doing kind of
like
he's talking to his mom, but it's just like when he actually interacts with him, you don't see that at all. And so it does make Mark Spector almost a little bit more interesting already, just in the weird dynamic he does or does not have with Steven. I do think that's really interesting. And I think, so Mark's married, and he's trying to get divorced or divorce papers. That was in there. We can recap that from breaking down. And then Steven and Layla kind of not like hit it off, but they have a good relationship. They get along. It almost seems like Steven is almost where Mark falls short in a lot of relationship, which is also interesting. Like,
well, and from things that you've told me and from comics that I've read, and like that very much is part of that Moon Knight DNA. And I mean, I guess could be true of people who actually have DID in a lot of different ways, where one personality falls short, maybe like the other personality develops to like fix that. Like the other personality, like they complement each other, like the whole thing in the comics is that all of the different personalities work together to form a team, and they're like a 3-person team in one body, and that's why. And I can see that starting to sort of develop here of, like when they need to get the fighting done and they need to like kick some butt, Mark Spector's like, give me the body because I'm going to get us out of here. And that's not your strength, Steven. But when they need to like talk to a valet or, whatever, they get, they got to get information from people and they got to be a little more smooth. Like that's where Steven comes in, because Mark doesn't really have people skills that we've seen so far. He's kind of just grunty and yelly and killy, I guess. But yeah, I mean, it does kind of lean right back into that Moon Knight thing of like the different personalities. When you put them together, is like one really talented, skilled, like a diverse skill set of a guy who can like operate as this vigilante. But when you put them separately, that's when there's the fun of it. But yeah, I mean that. I was thinking at this whole rewatch, just trying to figure out, like, look for clues, like who's the original, and not just with the personality thing, but right off the beginning of this episode, he gets fired from the museum job, and they're looking at the cameras, and no one else can see the jackals. I mean, later in the episode, they reveal that the jackal is in fact there because Layla throws the thing on it. But they do make you question it for like a quick second, saying like, okay, was there a jackal last episode? I mean, probably, but he could just be crazy. Like, we don't know. I think that's really fun. That's another really fun aspect of this, being like, what is real and what is not real, and who's the original, who's not the original, who's the imposter. There's like this weird cult guy. Layla is as confused as we are, and it just gets more exciting from there. But yeah, no, I think it's all super interesting. What else? What was something outside of like Mr. Knight and Layla? Any like Easter eggs in this episode that you saw that you want to talk about?
They had Crowley, the kind of human statue again. I don't know if we talked about this last week, so I don't think I knew.
I don't think we figured this out until after we discussed the episode.
Yeah, because I thought it was someone else. Yeah. So, I mean, he was there again, which kind of leads more into he's gonna be a significant character if he isn't already, maybe. I mean, could just be there again, but that makes me think more likely is. I'm convinced that Jake Lockley will show up at some point. I have no proof. I have no witness of it, but he's just so classic. But I really like, if they are setting him up, this episode, I didn't see as many teases, but there's so many instances where there's like a reflection and they purposely put a crack or have a mirror somewhere that there's 3 of them, or the face is split into 3. And they kind of do that in just the end credits. And that looks cool. And that could just be that, but it's just a lot. And I'm looking for it to be fair. But
at the end of the day, I feel like Marvel knows that we know that there's supposed to be we've done these finger things a lot this episode, and I feel like that's but Marvel knows that we know that there's supposed to be another personality, and I feel like at the very least, even if he never shows up, some of the hints have to be at least a little purposeful, just to like give us because they're not you. I mean, even if he never shows up in this series, you know it's going to end, and that's going to be one of the first things people start asking in interviews when they're talking to the creative team is like, why no Jake Lockley? Where is Jake Lockley? Is Jake Lockley in the next one? Where's Jake Lockley? And then they're going to be like, well, like we did throw a few Easter eggs in there, like here and there, and you'll be like, oh, okay, cool. But yeah, at the very least, I have to feel like some of it is purposeful. Some of it.
I think I forgot what it was last episode. Oh, last episode there was a reflection, and it was I think we even talked about it on here, but there were just like two of what looked like Mark, but like it could have been in kind of an infinite reflection situation or just a one, but it had two in that specific shot, and one head was like glaring over the other head. Like it was pretty interestingly shot, I guess, if it's not an Easter egg. But I do think what's interesting about Jake and what's really interesting about like anyone who's going to talk about Jake in the comics is more recently he's kind of hinted at and usually just hinted at. You don't see it a lot. I don't know, but he's become like the hyper violent, like no conscious one, which is conscience. I think I said that word right.
Yeah, it's funny is I don't think I ever say that word right on the first try.
Yeah.
I don't know why that one is so hard. I avoid saying it. I can't spell it either. Like when I'm writing reviews, I will actively write around it because like I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I figured I'd correct it so no one ends up watching
Yeah.
it or that word. But so because that is the more recent trend with him, and I think his more distinguishing personality trait in the comics, because he was a taxi driver and he was the one who had the contacts on the ground. He used Crawley to like know where to fight crime and whatnot. But other than that, wasn't necessarily doing a lot. But Jake got kind of interesting. And so I think that that's the route they would go with it. And so one scene that I read a lot into, maybe shouldn't have in this episode, was when Steven first becomes the mirror guy and he's complaining about being the mirror guy. There's a lot of cool reflections, but Mark, they're fighting, and Mark snaps for a second, and that's when he like destroys the mirror. And the snap seemed a little abrupt. And to be fair, Mark is kind of supposed to be violent as well, so like totally in character. But
Oh, I see where you're going
watching
with
it the
this.
second time, I was like, that almost seemed a little too at once for me, but I don't know. Yeah, but Jake's fun. Jake's the one in the comics. Jake is technically the father of Marlene and Mark's child because Mark like just wasn't around for a while.
That
Or he was
that
just
gets
it was the
that
only
get
really
that
recognized
gets
that
really messy.
they don't black out in the comics like like Steven had with Mark, but I guess in that comic, and it's like 2016, I think. I guess they did because Mark found out like I think it was your 6-year-old or 5-year-old daughter, and it's a fun one. But yeah, so I think that's where he would come in. So I think maybe people who are waiting for violence are maybe waiting for the reveal of him. I don't know, but
it's funny you say that because both times I never made that like hypothetical connection, but and again maybe just because I don't know Jake Lockley super well to know that he's like the violent one, but it did feel really out of place both times. And again, like I said, the fun part is rewatching it with my roommate who doesn't know anything and just kind of like is going into it totally blind, and even he kind of like as soon as he started freaking out, sat up in his seat like, whoa, I was not expecting the intensity of that. Um, that you're married,
yeah, I'm
guys.
really excited about that.
If this turns out to be true, you guys heard it here first. Mary is so smart; she's figuring it out.
Yeah,
Uh,
I really noticed that this one. I mean, if it's not true, I just look like an idiot, and that's okay.
no,
But
no. At the
I,
very least, you look clever.
yeah, I'll take it. But oh shoot, there's something I was gonna say.
Was it about Jake Lockley or Crawley
I
or?
think it was Jake Lockley related. I'm trying to. Oh, well, kind of. I mean, like we were just talking about, if Mark does have this like fondness for Steven and he's trying to be like protective of him and stuff, that's not the guy who's gonna go smash him in the mirror just like that.
Right.
But I have a theory that Mark knows about Jake and he's
Like protecting Steven from
yeah, he's
Jake.
protecting
He's
Steven.
like,
I think Mark hates Jake and Mark doesn't want to be Jake and Mark. So that's kind of in the comics too. I'm not just totally coming up with just random like the traits, but I think he's trying to like actively repress him maybe as well, and that's why we haven't seen him. But I don't think he's a surprise like I guess Mark was to Steven. That's my theory of
the
it.
thing is, if there is a hidden Jake, at the very least, Khonshu would have to know about him, right? Because Khonshu sees all the personalities. So even if he was like blacked out to Steven, or even hypothetically if like Mark doesn't know about him either, at the very least, Khonshu would be aware like there's a third guy who shows up sometimes, and I don't talk about him.
Yeah, I mean, Khonshu, I pay attention to that. Khonshu has never said anything. Nobody
Right.
has said anything that would explicitly limit it to two, or that they explicitly know it's only two. Even Arthur Harrow, and I don't know why he would know more, but he seems to have more connection to Khonshu and maybe even Mark than we know. But he even says like, "There's a lot of voices in you," and there are. But like, I read into that as well. Probably not needing to, but yeah, no, and I think Khonshu he calls Steven the idiot,
Yeah.
but he doesn't call him the other one. He doesn't call him the second one. It's
Right.
almost
No,
like
that's a
maybe
good
that
point.
is his label, and maybe Mark's is whatever. And Jake is also viewed as something, but hasn't mentioned him. But if they are revealing him later, like I wouldn't expect Khonshu to casually let the cat out of the bag on that one. But
Yeah, well, Khonshu seems to keep his cards pretty close to his chest. Like he just pops up to be like, "Kill that guy," and that's like his whole.
yeah, and that is something interesting about this is they don't go into like any of it. Like they just Mark's
Yeah.
just like tell Steven because Steven wants to know in like two sentences, and we move on. Presumably we'll get more, but it's like we're now going into well, we'll be in the third of 6 episodes next week, and we don't know anything. But it's like it's there. It's not like if
Yeah.
they're rolling out Khonshu's is there.
Yeah.
Uh, but I think that's interesting how little. And I don't know if that's intentional or if they're just trying to get through a lot, and maybe that is something
Well,
that's
I
kind of
do. I feel like they know they have to include the origin and all and Khonshu's like origin or whatever and all that stuff in this show, but that's not the story that the writers wanted to tell. And I'm glad they're not forcing them to tell it. Like I'm glad that no one at Marvel's like, if you're doing Moon Knight, you have to do the origin story, because I think this is exponentially more interesting. But it feels like they didn't want to do the origin story, so they're telling like the independent Moon Knight story that they really want to tell, which is fantastic. But just for like the viewer at home, they're also just slipping in those bits of the origin a little bit at a time. So I feel like by the end of the 6 episodes, and who knows, it might even be that like 4 episodes go by and we see nothing of the origin at all, and then episode 5 is like entirely a flashback episode, and then we go
oh,
into the finale with 6. Like that's like something that I feel like I wouldn't put that past them, um but yeah, I like that as well, that this show is just like throwing you into it. You don't really know what's going on, and then they give you little hints here or there. Yeah, I mean, I feel like for the most part that's the episode. And if I mean, we could, there's so much we could keep talking for like hours and hours. This little like the safe house that you found. The little like horror sequence they do where he's trying to escape and Khonshu is like following him around. There's like that quick freeze frame where he screams. He's like ah, and then it like freezes on his
yeah.
face, and then it cuts to him. I've seen some people talk about. I mean, people were talking about it in our own group chat, but I've seen some people talk about it on Twitter too. And I feel like reactions are really split on that as well. Some people are like, "That's stupid," and other people are like, "That's hilarious." And we don't have to discuss this, but I just want the people to know I am 100% on the side of I think it was amazing, and I think it's exactly why I'm loving this show so much. Yeah, it's stupid. Like it's stupid, but not in like a bad way. It's just like that scene is ridiculous, and so much of the things that happen in the show is ridiculous. And the fact that he like, I even like to in my head, was imagining that Steven experienced that moment like that. Like that is how he like he freeze framed in his brain and then like cut to being elsewhere. Like I think that's like a funny, like his brain is deteriorating. Did you want to talk about Crawley as the last thing we talk about
I
before?
mean, I think he was just there again. I don't know if there's anything extra. He's Stephen talks to him. I think he's probably gonna be some kind of character down the line. I don't know if that means in the series or in a future project, but I don't know. Second appearance, and they really focus on him too. It's not like he's in the background. So
Yeah, he even moves a little bit in this when Steven hugs him and he kind of like he gives him the little side eye of like, what is this guy doing? Which I really liked. Okay, well, if that's the case, is there anything else you want to talk about, or?
no, I think we did pretty well.
Yeah, we did pretty well with all the big stuff. So thank you everybody for watching. This has been the Universal Church of Truth Moon Knight episode 2, episode 3 technically with our Morbius thing. You know, fun times. We're gonna be here for at least the rest of Moon Knight. So I hope you're enjoying. I have been Hunter.
I have been Mary.
Have a good day, everybody.